Call the finance meeting to order on Wednesday, March 30th at 1 o'clock. Are there any changes to the agenda? Okay, if there's no changes, if no one objects, we'll approve the minutes as they're presented in here. Does anyone have anything they want to? Okay, it's time the public comments. Is there any member of the public here that would like to say something? Okay, then Dave, you said you were ready.
Yeah, I'm raring to go.
And you're gonna do the.
Judy up on the agenda?
Pardon me? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep.
I'm sorry, on the agenda, we do need to change the agenda to where the last item is first. The ultrasound capital expenditure. So Judy, if you'll go ahead and if no one objects, we'll change her. Okay, so Judy, go ahead and.
Okay, so we're asking for a new probe for a vascular probe. We bought the ultrasound, about a year or two ago. They kind of talked us into that we didn't need a vascular probe, that one of the other probes that came with it that would do good vascular studies. Well, we've been working with it for a while and we've losing a little bit of detail, especially on heavier patients or patients with a lot of swelling or cellulitis. So we talked to the rep and they actually sent us and let us demo one for a week or so to see if we truly were missing detail mainly in the legs. And after a week using it, the ultrasound techs said it made a huge difference for vascular. And so I called back to the rep and we talked about it. And because they felt it was kind of slightly their fault that they talked us out of this probe, and instead of $14,000, they were purchase price would be $5,000. So it did make a huge difference in our vascular scanning. So that's why we were asking for it.
Okay, it sounds like an awesome deal. It sounds like something we need for the benefit of our patients. I don't think we can charge any more for it, but it's our responsibility to do the best we can, I think. So
right, because we don't want to lose detail in vascular.
Okay. Catherine, what do you think? Do we need a motion or?
I think we do need a motion, but yeah, I agree with it, especially for the price. Makes you
Right.
wonder how overpriced it was the first time.
I'm sure it was
So maybe
overpriced.
they saved us, $9,000 for doing that. So, yeah.
How long will that last?
It will last most likely as long as the machine lasts. Rarely do we have to replace probes.
Okay.
Probes, unless it gets dropped or anything like that. But I don't believe that we have not replaced a probe. We've replaced machines. Machines last maybe 10 years or so, maybe even
Okay.
longer.
Okay. Catherine, were you gonna make a motion to send it?
Yeah, I would make a motion that we accept this bid and we purchase the item for that department.
Okay.
I'll second that. Yeah.
Okay. All right, then if anybody object to it, then we'll send it to consent.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you for bringing that.
Thank you.
That way I can get back. Thank you.
Back to work.
Back to work. Thanks. Happy to see you.
Okay, now we're back to putting Dave on the firing line. Thank you for the, I got to get back if it just 1 second here. You're going to mention D also on page 19. Long-term financing trends.
Yeah, we're going to do that at near the end of my presentation. We're going to start out on page 7. And I do want to give you an advance that what I'm going to be showing you on the shared screen is identical. I'm going to take the liberty to give you there's some minor reclassifications Barbara and I did at the end as it related to the completed audit that was presented a couple months ago. So what I'm going to be showing you, you'll see where there's minor changes in what you have in your packet, but we're pretty much going to follow everything that you got in your packet. So if you don't mind, I'm going to jump right in. And what I'm sharing with you today will be what's put in the full board packet for next week.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, so we're on page 7, which is the statistics. And when we look at, make it a little bit bigger. When we look at the acute side, these top line items, line 7 and line 8, you can see the actual compared to budget on both discharges and patient days. In the month of February came in very close to what was expected and budgeted. However, until you get down to line 15, you can see a deviation there with the average length of stay being 6.0 compared to the budget of 4.8, significantly higher average length of stay. Now with that,
But
also
would that-
agrees, go ahead.
Would that make any difference if you've got the numbers of days and the average days, they're going to cross over each other, aren't they?
Yeah,
So
well,
really-
they do in the same column. That's true. But the average length of stay is a function of how much more days were compared to the discharges. So that's a good point. What I also wanted to point out to you is looking down at the line item 46 and 47 tells us how sick the patients are in terms of its severity and intensity of coding on the case mix index. And the higher to the number, the more severe the patients are. And you can see we have some real high numbers in the month of February on line 46, 1.29 and 1.28 for all payers. So that makes sense when we look at the fact that the patients had to stay longer. Before they were discharged. The other thing moving down, I want to just make reference to the fact that we really still haven't made any progress yet on line 28, the long-term care. We average 46.3, so it's still at about the same levels it's been all year. The next thing I want to talk about is the ER visits, which is line 32. Now this 493 number for the month of February, you can see it's quite a bit off a budget of 612. I looked it up, and what we had averaged the first 7 months of the year, each month, the average ER visits was 610. So it dropped quite a bit in February, down to 493. That's about a 20% drop. Now, because February is 28 days, the difference between the days cuts into it about 8%. So it's really about a 12% reduction in ER visits compared to what we've had the rest of the months of this current fiscal year, which we're now through 8 months. So is it slower than normal ER visits? What you see in the yellow is just updated numbers from your packet. It's slightly different. I think we had 0 in observation days, so we fixed that.
Dave, on the ER visits, that's only 1 month. That's not a trend, right? I mean, it's
point. And I did have in my notes to make comment, if you look at the year to date, we're still in good shape. And also to look at a year ago, last February, it was only 437. So maybe February is a typical slower month in ER for some reason. So we actually did better than last February. So overall, ER has still been a good year for the ER.
yeah.
So could I make a comment here, Dave? So I'm looking at the COVID results from January. We had average 9.6 or 9.7% of the ER visits were COVID positive, and then a sharp drop in February. But I think that there may have been a trend related to the increase in COVID from the month before, people were not willing to come to the hospital.
Mhm.
And that may be impacting that number too.
You know, and we've certainly seen that trend throughout the phases of COVID where people really get nervous about coming to the ER when they know there's a high incidence going on. They are encouraged not to come unless they have to. And that's kind of a double-edged dangerous thing in my opinion, because some of those people probably need to come in. They really have issues that need to be dealt with.
Absolutely agree.
But hospitals have suffered in volumes significantly, and I think the patients as well, when they don't get their needs met, when they don't go to the ER.
David, is it okay, like I've been interrupting and there's some comments, is that okay if we talk to you while you're presenting it?
Absolutely, because sometimes I forget to before I go to the next page, ask if there's any questions.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah, I like to keep things informal, and that works out for me. The next line item is a higher number than we normally been seeing this year. That's FTEs, and it's actually slightly lower than what we had in the last version. What we were doing on, I think it was 224, the higher FTEs, we were doing an adjustment for year to date. When we started the security program, even though that's not full-time equivalents of employed, it's contract labor FTEs, we were not counting those some of the early months of the fiscal year. So we kind of had to throw all those hours into February and show a catch-up. I decided to show you what the real number was, which was 213, but now we have caught up on the statistics so that we're showing the combination of contract labor and our own internal staff's full-time equivalents compared to budget. So it's a little bit higher in February. Nothing to be concerned about. When we get over to the profit loss statement, you'll see that salaries are still in good shape, but it was a higher number for the month of February, partially due to these to the adjustment we had to make for the security department. The other thing going on with the month of February is we added, I think, 8 CNAs that are all full-time right now, going through their classes. So those students count as a full-time equivalent. And obviously those are lower paid employees. So that's why salaries didn't look too bad. It shows a higher FTE number, but not so much in terms of higher salaries. Any questions or comments before I move on? Okay, I was going to move up 2 pages, up to page 9. And I was going to make reference to my positive and negative takeaways. Starting on the number 1 positive takeaway. Whoops, I just hit the wrong button. Now, how am I going to get back?
You go at the top of your screen and click on the tab for the finance packet.
Yes, and I don't know.
Right in the middle, Dave.
Middle.
Third one there.
This is a new one for me, so I'll have it figured
See
out.
The document at the top of your screen.
FinPack revised,
Okay, right
there.
Right there.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so what I was going to talk about next is I'm emphasizing this month the fact that we're looking just specifically at net operating surplus. The reason why I want to make that a separate notation is what you're going to see the next 5 months is a large adjustment in the non-operating, which doesn't have so much to do with what's going on right now, but it has to do with the adjustments made from prior years with the COVID money that we're now realizing we don't have to pay back. So you're going to see 200,000 each month the rest of this year going to that non-operating. So when actually reported, I want to emphasize more the operating, because that's more about what's currently going on in operations versus prior year adjustments. In this case, February's operating was also very good at 135,000 better than budget. And that's not counting the other amounts that were put in the non-operating category. The next thing I want to make reference to is the overall bottom line, 3, rounded up at 1.8 million ahead of budget we are. So looking at things in general for the whole year, we're considerably above budget on total surplus of close to 1.8 million. So that's a positive takeaway. Another favorable issue going on right now is our costs are lower. We saw a reduction in costs in February, 30,000 below budget. And we wanted to point out on the negative side that despite our good amount of high collections in both our regular collections and IGTs, we still are projecting a slight drop in the overall cash balances by the end of this fiscal year. By the end of June is assumed to be a few million less than where we started the year, and we'll be showing you detail later on why that is, and as we get into more cash flow related analysis of how we've done. And I'll keep in mind what I'm talking about here is we're introducing a new concept today, which is I'm going to be showing you a category of all cash, all sources, and we'll start making reference to that as new terminology. And that number is still around $26 million when you add up all the different accounts that we have in a variety of different capacities. And I'm going to go to the balance sheet right now, and I'm going to show you that new concept that I've labeled on line 2 called all cash sources. And you can see 26,504,000. And going over to the far right, you can see that number at year end was almost 30 million. So, and by the way, that 30 million, you should be real pleased with how that's grown, because I looked it up at the end of fiscal 18, before you started fiscal 19, that number was 9 million. So you basically grew your cash by $20 million in 3 years. So that's, I think, a very, I haven't seen that type of a growth anywhere in any hospital ever. So I think that you should be proud of how you've really put yourself in a much better position today than you were a couple of years ago as it relates to cash. And if you talk to most rating agencies, their favorite mantra is cash is king. So, you know, this is a very important indicator of the strength of the organization, is looking at your overall cash position.
Dave, should we send part of that to Chet?
I think you should. I think as a thank you, give him a little thank you there. It'd be, he certainly deserves it.
He did a great job. Thank you.
Now, we did have a good month showing up the difference between what we had at the end of last month and what we have at the end of February. It increased by 1,852,000. That's a nice jump in 1 month. And we'll see later why that was. The other big changes on this particular sheet is I highlighted the word audited. Up until now, we were showing you unaudited amounts for 6/30/2021. Barbara's put in all the journal entries from Rick Jackson's audit. So now we have an accurate picture of how we finished the year based on the audit. The other thing I had to do, the reason why we're going through all this is I had to marry up the current financial format to the way Rick did his audit, so that would be apples to apples. And I don't think Chet ever did that. We always would see some discrepancies in terms of certain categories being different than how it was presented in the audit. And I'm trying to marry those two up going forward so that what we see in the internals can be an apples to apples comparison to the audit reports. For example, Rick added a line item on the asset side due from third-party payers. We didn't used to report that. And his number was 197. You can see now that number has gone up to 274. So that's a good thing because that's more that's owed us from settlements on Medicare or Medicaid has gone up from 197 up to 274. The other thing I want to make reference to is this is a negative trend here where we continue to underperform in the collection percentage. Our net to gross AR is set up to estimate how much of future collections we're going to get of our existing accounts receivable. And our collection rate, which was budgeted at 22, has been hovering between 20 and 21%, which is quite a bit less. I am looking at it. We have some denials out there that we're going to be challenging. That isn't as good as we can do. So it's an area and an opportunity of improvement that I'm taking more time on and working with the business office. A lot of it happened when they were short-staffed, and the catch up and getting those bills resubmitted ended up causing some at least temporary denials due to timeliness of filing. So I'm a little bit concerned that we didn't do as good a job as we should have in those few months where we were short-staffed. And I just want to, I'll keep you informed of how we're doing on that.
Dave, can you identify anything that on the front end that we're delaying or slowing down on that might impact you guys?
We could probably get a little more cooperation from our hospitalist because a lot of times they ask for more documentation, and it requires the physician on duty to write a brief letter of explanation on why the patient had to change services from swing to acute or to long-term care. So it's more on the documentation side, and cooperation from Dr. Gross would help a little bit going forward. But other than that, it looks like they've really got a good handle on going forward and a good process in place. We do have some grant money, and we're bringing in some consulting help for extra training for the department, and it's all going to be paid for by the grant.
Dave, we were talking or last meeting or so ago about the maximum out of pocket because of COVID and the length of stay.
Yeah,
A lot of people hit
I
that
did spend
maximum.
some time with the business office manager on that, and she went through a lot of detail with me. Thankfully for us, it comes into play, but not very often, where they have high balances as a result of that maximum amount of pay. The good news for us is that's not a major issue for us because we just don't have enough of those, at least currently on our list of high balances that still haven't been paid. We only saw a couple of those.
Okay, good. But well, we've got a lot of Medicare and Medicaid, which
Yes,
don't have that happen too often.
exactly. The other thing I want to point out, this cash all sources, this 26 million number. What I did is I highlighted in yellow what were the line items that make up that amount. And just to give you an idea what I'm trying to accomplish here is I want us to be able to see all the potential dollars that we could either use for normal operations and for spending on the seismic master construction, the 19 million budgeted construction that has to be done in the next 7 years. Because when I'm going to be doing future cash flow projections, I want to be able to compare that number to what we consider to be a safe level of reserves, but knowing that any of that money can be spent on the construction, including like line item 16, because I know the board even though it's a restricted account for the LAIF account, we do allow for those dollars to be used for the construction. So I'm counting that as cash all sources, anything that can be used on a construction. The next page, which is the liabilities, I did the similar thing of now having an audited column on the far right for 6/30/2021. But I want to make reference to how Rick categorized the settlement accounts, which is a big part of the balance sheet because of Chet's conservatism. We've had some high amounts that we are reserving to pay back, possibly pay back. We're not 100% sure we can keep the money. And you can see the balances on line 10 at the end of the year for audit was $1,065,000 of current liabilities that we have to pay back according to this. And then the other large line item of 14 million on line 20, long-term settlements, is 14,302,000. The auditors decided to stay conservative and to leave those amounts in there, but he did make a comment to me that he expects that gradually we need to be bringing those down to more accurate numbers. And so far I haven't, if you add up these two numbers on line 10 and line 20, you come up with like 15,400,000, and it's about 100,000 less if you add up the two numbers in the current month. So I've only brought up about 100,000 to the bottom line, which is a good thing because what we've just talked about is the fact that our bottom line looks really good, but thankfully there wasn't that much that came from this prior year adjustment. It has to do with higher than what was estimated on the IGTs, which was a different issue than what we're talking about here in terms of posting to prior year end. So I thought that was interesting when I looked at putting this apples to apples together now that we're only about 100,000 less in payables. And we will continue to look at that and starting to bring those numbers down. What that means for you as a board member is you'll see a bigger bottom line, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's more cash coming into the organization. It's just a correction of a prior year underestimate of how much money that we brought in. So if the way the accounting works is if the audit's done and you haven't posted it, you can't go back to a prior year. You have to show it in the current year, and we're required to do that. So what I worry about is the board would get an unrealistic picture that we're perhaps doing better than what we're showing, because we're going to be showing some good bottom lines, and we still have challenges ahead of us in terms of making sure that the actual cash flow for the particular period that we're showing is still positive, because sometimes your bottom line can look real high, but your actual change in cash isn't going to be the same, because there's a difference between accrual accounting and cash accounting that causes those differences when you're dealing with prior year adjustments. So I know that's kind of a confusing.
You're still staying conservative, right?
Yeah, we're staying conservative and we're not moving too much of that over yet, because I like Chet's philosophy, because you certainly don't want to be the opposite of having a big bill to pay and you don't have anything reserved for it.
Right.
So nothing wrong with that. Now for the profit loss for February, the next page, I want to look at revenues first. And surprisingly, we talked about how ER was down. You would have thought line 3 outpatient revenue would be down, and you can see it was 141,000 higher than budget. So I looked up the detail and it jumped out at me. So there's a line item in outpatient revenue that was like 350,000 over budget, and that was CT scanner. So we had a slower than normal ER, except CT scanner got used a lot. So the patients that didn't come to the hospital, a lot of them needed a CT. It was significantly higher than budget, and that's why outpatient revenue was higher. So overall, we were about break even on gross charges, less than 1% variance there. This 196,000 favorable variance on line 10, that comes from higher than expected IGT. So what we do in our net revenues is it's a combination of what we get from normal services plus IGT money. So in the past, Chet would always show that as zero. We're starting to show those IGT dollars coming in as they come in. We're no longer adding that to the payables because there really isn't any proof that any of that will ever have to be paid back. So it ends up showing up as a favorable, positive thing for us on the bottom line, showing up a lower amount of deductions from revenue and a higher, a favorable variance here when we compare it to budget. So that helped us in the month to have a favorable net patient revenue of 141,000 variance, and then total operating revenue of slightly over 100,000 positive variance. That combined with the expenses being below budget gave us the operating surplus favorable of 135,000. The other line that I talked about earlier, the non-operating that you're going to see every month for the rest of this year, because I'm gradually bringing in that COVID money that we know we don't have to pay back. So I'm bringing in a million of that the rest of this year. So for the last 5 months, you're going to see this 200,000, unless I hear new news that all of a sudden they're going to challenge that, and we don't have any reason to think that they will. But instead of bringing it all to the bottom line, I'm gradually doing it just in case we get some unexpected bad news that all of a sudden there's going to be another audit on it or something. I don't have any reason to think that, but I'm just trying to be careful not to put it all to the bottom line all at once. But I want you to understand when you see this number on line 30, where it's coming from. Is there any questions or comments? I'm kind of going into quite a few complicated issues, but I couldn't figure out any way not to oversimplify and wouldn't make it any more understandable. So I'm trying to get into a little bit more detail to explain to you why the numbers are the way they are.
Can I make just a comment, not a question?
Sure.
I hope we're not paying you what you're worth.
I really enjoy doing this, and it's especially fun because of the good financial picture Chet that I inherited, because it's we've got a lot of opportunity for doing a lot of good things here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the updates and the way you explain it.
Good, because I worry that I can get long-winded and get into make things somewhat go over people's head, and I don't want to do that to you, and I apologize if once in a while it's probably inevitable that I will do that, but I'll try if there's some way I can restate something in an easier way, I'll try to do that.
Thank you.
We're showing the monthly IGT payments. This was a big number that came in February. So the good news is we got a lot of cash that came in on IGTs. The bad news is that's probably mostly what we're going to get for the rest of this year. We're not going to get a whole lot more. Normally in May and June are two really good IGT months. And we have some summary down at the bottom of the next page on lines 35 through 39, especially line 39, where we're seeing the trend of the total amount that's come in on IGTs this year of 6.6 million. We budgeted 5.7 million, so that's a favorable number that I was talking about before, why our net patient revenues are better. Now, in relative terms, it's nice that we're ahead of budget, But look at this middle column. And you could make it a real negative by saying, hey, yeah, but it's a lot worse than it was last year. And that's a good point. And we knew that going into this year that they weren't going to be paying us because of the change of the fiscal year for the state. And it's happening, everything's happening what we thought it would happen. And we are getting significantly less this year in IGT money. And you can see that the rest of this year, the projection is only slightly higher. Usually we get around 5 million at the end of the year. Well, we're only projecting about 1 million between now and the end of June for our projected fiscal 22 on line 39 is 7.9 million compared to the current year to date of 6.6 million. So it's going to go up a little bit higher, but not anywhere near as where we finished last year at 13.4 million. You can see how it was a year ago. It was 6.8 million at this stage last year, and it ended up almost double. So usually the end of the year is really a lot. But this year it's not. We're not getting those normal IGTs that come in May and June like we did in prior years. So that's because those numbers are so significant is why I keep repeating myself. You can see those are big numbers. So I wanted to just move right into just a brief on AR. We look at collections and we see that it's down. Part of that is the collection percentage is not as high as we were hoping. So we're hoping to see the rest of this year, these monthly numbers get closer to a little over 2 million instead of 1.5 and 1.7 million in terms of average patient collection. So we can get our AR back down to where we think it should be. And I've got some good consulting coming in, and I have all the confidence that over time with the right training, we have good systems in place that we're gonna get to where we want to be. What historically we've had those numbers, days in AR in the 60s and 70s, and we need to get back to those numbers. So I'm checking my notes here, and the next thing I want to talk about is that's pretty much it, and except for the special agenda item. Heidi, do you want me to just do that right now, or do we want to have a separate agenda item and talk about the long-term care or the long-term debt borrowing trends?
No way.
So we'll just keep
Let's go on to it now.
Okay, so let's just go ahead and go to that page. So here it is. I labeled it long-term notes summary. And there's a lot of information. I tried to color code the stuff that's no longer a long-term debt. It has a balance of 0 because I wanted to kind of show a trend in what we have now compared to what we had even just a year ago, because a lot of it was a refinance. And one of the key columns is the interest rate we were paying on our debt. And we ended up refinancing the Oshpod and the 2003 revenue bonds, this 6.7 million or so, that had high interest rates, 5% and 5.5%. The new interest rate on the US bank bond is down to 2.75. So Chet did a good job in getting those interest rates down dramatically before I got here. So what we're paying on interest is a lot better. The other thing that I found interesting was this is for new borrowing, which is it's kind of new borrowing. It's a refinance of new borrowing. It only has a 13-year term. And I think Gary Hicks had to marry up the prior bond ending date to what was being refinanced. I think that's why it's 13 years. But the point I want to make is that's a ambitious way to take on the debt. You obviously get it paid off a lot faster if you shorten the length of time you're going to need to pay it back. So the organization will be out of debt faster because this new borrowing was only 13 years. The bad part about the length of the borrowing is it requires a higher monthly payment. Now, despite that, this $96,000 a month that we have to pay on this new debt, it still compares favorably to what we had to pay on the retired debt when you look at the yellow numbers in the far right. So our overall payments on debt has come down. A year ago, it was $197,000 on line 11 on the far right column. And our current monthly payment is averaging about $172,000. I wanted to add a third column here to give you some even better news that as soon as we get rid of these lines 9 and 10, which were COVID advances, we didn't even ask for that money, but they were loaned to us for 0% interest. So it's like free money, but it's still causing us to have to make a large monthly payment. Those go away. So post-COVID, we go from a $2 million a year amount of debt service down to only 1.3 million. So that'll be significantly easier to make those payments at the end of 23 when we get those two borrowings paid off on the advances that were done to us for us. So this is a kind of a detailed picture. It to me, it overall looks positive. I did want to make another comment here in my below here that we had onerous covenants and restrictions that were very difficult to manage and to comply with, that we got rid of when we did the refinancing. So yes, we have a lot of debt. Yes, it's better if we could not have any debt, but in relative terms, what we have today versus what we had, let's say, a year ago is a much better picture.
Dave, thank you for doing that. It's very detailed. Could we put down as of, it would seems like it'd be a lot of trouble to update it and maybe update it annually because it doesn't make a lot of difference, but keep it on there where it's visible. Is that possible?
I can certainly make all this a bigger font if that's what you're implying, and that's not a problem. I oftentimes come to the conclusion that I get carried away by trying to show too much information on one page.
No, it's fine. What I'm saying, just incorporate this rather than updating it. I mean, it's not going to make a lot of difference. Just put down as of last month and then update it annually or something like that. Unless there's a new loan, you could add it on. But
not a problem. Perhaps quarterly, I'll give you an update on what our new monthly payments are.
That would be great.
On a negative note, that's a sobering part of us going forward, is keep in mind every year before we start the year, based on prior commitments, which is the definition of long-term debt, is it's a prior commitment. We start out the year knowing that we're 2 million in the hole of what has to come be a disbursement for that year of something that's not even related to services that are offered in the current year, but it has to do with the prior commitments from prior years. We start out with a negative $2 million cash flow that we have to make up for. The good news is that number goes down significantly to 1.3.
What if we buy you a box of erasers?
Yeah, that would help. Sure. The other thing I wanted to point out is this 12.6 million that you see on the US banknote on line 5.5 million is in our bank right now for the new construction project. So it's not all money that's spent. It's part of that money that we're going to need for the seismic project. So you probably know all that, but it's just a summary so that you can see it all in one place. Any other comments or questions? And I hope I didn't, because I'm new here, it was a learning experience for me to do this report too. So I hope I haven't misstated anything.
Yeah, it is awesome. It's detailed. You did an awesome job.
Good, thank you. It was fun to do because I needed to learn this anyway. As your new CFO, I needed to understand all this detail.
Thank you.
That's all I have for my report for the month. I'll try to get you back to the stop share. So I think we're back. So I survived the mishap of not knowing how to get to hitting the wrong button in the middle of my presentation.
Okay, then I think Barbara,
Local vendor aging is the next page. There's $9,345 as of 3/22 when this was run. It's all current.
yeah, it looks good. Looks really good. Okay, then is there any questions for Barbara? Catherine? No questions for Barbara?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay, there is no old business. New business contract review. I don't see anything to review on here. There's a couple questions I've got. And that is on the beta. Is there any way we could get the past 3 years on the increases just to get a look at it? There's nothing on here, right? I mean, it's just renew it.
Yeah, that's a good point. What I normally like doing is giving you a context of what the current number is with a little bit of history, and we can do that on the beta.
Just on beta. The rest of it, I think is normal and looks good. And beta is good, and they've backed us up and they've helped us and they've performed, but just to look at it.
I remember the last year I was at San Gornio, our malpractice went way up with beta. So it's an industry-wide issue going on right now. And I think it is up higher, significantly higher from all hospitals the last couple of years.
Okay, just give us maybe the last 3 years so we can just look, and even though it's gone up, I don't think it probably makes any difference, but
No, it's a good thing. It's a good educational moment for all of us to see how these trends are going.
okay.
That's a good request.
Does anyone have any comments or anything on the rest of it?
I also wanted to say that I've been promising you this big picture 7-year cash flow pro forma. It's still in draft form. I'm feeling guilty because I really expected it to be done by now. And I just need to sit down with Tim, and it's going to take us a long time for him to understand what I'm trying to accomplish before I present it to the full board, so that I do it accurately and make sure that we're showing the information that is accurate and easy to understand. It's gotten pretty complex. There's a lot of moving parts to any organization. My goal in presenting and coming up with a model like this is that we don't get surprised that when things come up, we have a number to compare it to, and we can see whether we are staying on track or not. And that involves us making sure that every transaction, every disbursement, every collection receipt that comes in has a category, has an amount projected, and has an assumption behind that projection, so that we can understand where we're heading as an organization and what we can afford to do and what we can't afford to do. So to me, it's going to be an important part of what we talk about on a regular basis. So I want to make sure that Tim and I are on the same page.
Okay, That's wonderful. As long as you get it done by next week.
Our last conversation is both Tim and I agree we needed to talk more often.
You're again, I hate to tell you 3 times in one meeting that you're doing great, but
Thank you. And those words really do drive my motivation to do even better because I'm working for a very good board.
cool. Okay, I think we're down to the capital expenditure for Greg Davis. Is that where we're at, Heidi?
Yes,
Okay, is Greg
provided
there?
that do you want all the contracts to go on the consent agenda?
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, everything but beta. Right?
Yeah, well, we're not gonna approve it, or are we just gonna hold it to the board meeting, or?
It can certainly be that extra information we can have ready for the board meeting. And then so you can make your approval contingent upon that 3-year analysis being.
When does it
attached.
renew?
It actually renews July 1st, but they're working on our quotes for the next year. We just submitted our renewal application because of the timing. It takes them a while to put together the figures, and probably in May, late May, we'll get the proposal for them for our rates for 20.
Well, what are we approving today then? If we approve this, what are we approving?
To continue with the renewal.
To continue with the renewal process.
Oh, okay.
It's probably,
Okay, well,
in
we wanna
hindsight, we
continue.
probably
We
should
want
have,
to see it before.
we
Yeah.
probably should coordinate the board approval of the renewal with whether we want to move forward with them
Right.
we probably should do a better job in coordinating that so that you have the ideal would be that you know what you're approving. And right now we'd have to say, we don't know what the premiums are going to be next year yet.
Right, well, we need to know before we approve it, shouldn't we?
So maybe we should table it for a month or 2.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay, thank you. Heidi, you got that?
I do.
Okay. Catherine, do you have any comment about it?
I do not. I do not. I agree that we need to know what they are. So maybe changing I know we have to have approval and consent for them to start the renewal process, and that's what we're doing. That's been submitted. But, taking a
Yeah.
couple months to find out what the actual costs are going to be. So,
They
Yeah.
they seem to be awesome. They seem to be good.
Yeah.
But if there's a lot of bad apples, then we're carrying the weight for the bad apples. Maybe there's somebody else that we could attach ourselves to, but probably everything's fine the way it is. But okay, Greg Davis.
Greg was unable to make it today.
Okay. I need
So this is just with one copy machine that we're replacing, is that it?
This is for the replacement of one copy machine in the population health building, and it's to replace a unit that's becoming no longer serviceable. It's coming to the end of its service life, and so it's just a replacement unit.
and is that cost, the equipment and the budgeted cost, that was back in January? So is the cost the same or?
As far as I know, it is the same.
Okay.
Barbara, do you have any idea whether that cost went up at all?
No, I don't.
When Carrie initially got the proposal, it was sort of a package deal. It included a copy machine for the emergency department that was also reaching the end of its serviceable life, and one other one. So it's kind of just going through that process. But even the one for the ER, the quote did not change.
Okay.
But what are we doing with the old copy machines? 6 years old is not a long time unless we get extremely high volume.
You know, the one in the emergency room does see a pretty high volume, and that one tends to wear out faster than lots of others that we have in the facility. But the one from population health, I'm not clear how old that one is.
But it's 6 years old. Where is it gonna, how do we dispose of it? It's what I'm getting at.
What I'm familiar with, it's
That-
normally,
that would
it
be,
normally has a trade-in value when we.
Yeah, exactly.
so when
Okay,
we-
so we'll trade it in?
Yeah, it results in a reduction of the new machine that we're buying.
Okay,
On a
Aren't there
case-
internal parts that have to be scrubbed
Good question.
because of HIPAA?
Yeah, I never thought about that. With HIPAA now, there's probably some extra steps involved.
okay.
We'll run that by Carrie.
Okay. Catherine, do you think we should go ahead and it looks like a reasonable thing, a reasonable price.
Right, and I think, I mean, if we need the product, we need the product. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to slow, even though we're a paperless world and system, we always need printer copiers for those extra pieces. So, yeah, I mean, if it was already something Carrie worked on, I mean, but again, the HIPAA information's always something to check into, but
Yeah,
I
we're-
make a motion, we provide it.
Okay, gonna need a second.
Second.
Okay, we'll send it to the consent agenda or put it on the consent agenda. And does anyone have anything else they want to say? Can I adjourn?
I think so.
You can.
Okay, we're adjourned.
Okay
Thank
with
you.
me.
And Dave, thank you again. And Tim, thank you. I didn't say hi to you. I didn't see you there. John shines so much.
I'm losing weight. He's just kind
Hard to
of
see
blocking me
it.
out here too.
Catherine, thank you. Go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tim's hiding behind John Blythe.
See
Hi,
ya.
everybody.
Bye.
We'll talk to you later.